you may not know what a Rennie is, but if you are one, you know exactly who I'm talking to. Today, someone sent me, in fact, our good friend Court Lindell, author who's appeared on this show many times, sent me a notice that someone had posted that there had been a discovery made in the village of Rennes-le-Château today, and it was underneath a house, and the claim was that it was a tomb or a burial place with a body inside and some badly sort of decomposed parchments. I don't know if this is real. I don't know if it's a hoax. What really made me kind of doubt the veracity of the story was at the very end of the little article, it said that the mayor, Alex Pankow, as many of you know in that village that we're all so familiar with, quoted that I put my hands in the fire that this is the body of Mary Magdalene. Now, I have a little bit of trouble thinking that Mayor Alex Pankow would make that kind of pronouncement on a preliminary find like that. So I'm kind of questioning this. The other thing is that oddly turns out that the house underneath which this find was supposedly made is a house I'm extremely familiar with. In fact, many, many times when I've stayed in the village there in southwest France of Rennes-le-Château, I've stayed directly across the street from that very, very house and looked out onto it. And I had a strange Me Too experience with the owner of that house. So it's quite puzzling, and it would be quite hilarious if there did turn out to be a really authentic find there, and I was looking out over it for years, year after year after year, as I stayed in the village, of course, looking for clues and researching and on the trail of the secrets of Rennes-le-Château. So more on this, hopefully by next week. And I'll also be posting more as I hear it on Facebook. But if any of you Rennies out there, any of you locals down on the ground in Southwest France, if you've got any information, I'd love to have it. Send me some information if you found that it's a hoax, if you've got anything that authenticates the story, just anything at all. I'd appreciate a heads up. So you can find me on Facebook, or you can email me right here through InceptionRadioNetwork.com. All right. Well, enough about that. On with the subject at hand. And oh my goodness, I should say subjects, because we've got a panorama of things that we could cover tonight. We're going to see how far we get, because my guest is so knowledgeable in so many areas. Now, my guest tonight is an esteemed Harvard astrophysicist. Many of you have heard of Dr. Rudolph Schild. He's with me tonight. I persuaded him to stay up late on the East Coast and join us. So, Dr. Schild, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. We appreciate it very, very much. Now, as you know, when I originally contacted you, it was just following that New York Times article and the announcement regarding the Pentagon UFO program that dealt with Senator Harry Reid and Las Vegas billionaire Robert Bigelow. Now, there's been a lot of talk about why this was released, why now, what was really behind it. But to me, it's just interesting that the information was made public at all. And it is interesting that someone like Senator Harry Reid would have been involved. And I do know that Harry Reid is a personal friend of Robert Bigelow, so maybe it's not that far-fetched. They both are Las Vegas guys, and they probably run in some of the same circles. But I'm just wondering, I know you've done a lot of work in the area of studying UFO experiences, and were a good friend, a good close friend of the late Dr. John Mack, and did some of that work with him and then carried on. Do you see this news that's coming out having any impact at all on what you're doing or on the subjects of your study?
Well, I should say that we've all been waiting for the point when disclosure occurs in our civilization, and I'm sure you've discussed this endlessly. And it would be hard to believe for any of us that this could really be it. So in some ways, it's the most exciting moment. And yet I think that all of us are a little bit cautious. And we would like this kind of a discovery of this magnitude to be confirmed by somebody else. And you might say, well, it's been confirmed by probably 500,000 reports of UFO abductions over the past 40 years. And so perhaps it's a confirmation of what they have already learned. Frankly, I find it difficult as an academic to relate to this as a significant discovery because of the way it's being handled as a leak through of a very secure social network that until now has successfully kept the entire subject and its investigation a top secret. I hope that many of your listeners are aware that the late John Podesta, at the time that he retired from service to our former president Osama bin Laden,
Barack Obama.
Barack Obama. It's a little bit late at night for me. Sorry, folks.
I have to tell you, I've actually made that very, very same mistake. And when Barack Obama was running for president, I said, you know what? I'd be surprised if he gets elected because his name sounds too much like Osama. So there you just proved my point.
Okay. Thank you. You've been so kind, Renee.
No worries.
When Frank Podesta retired, he said in a highly publicized statement that he was severing his ties to the Obama administration as he had agreed with the president he would do following the re-election campaign. And that having been accomplished, he was now retiring, but then went on to say that the largest frustration of his administration as, I believe, as the president's chief of staff, that failure was his inability to get a briefing for himself and the president of the United States on the American UFO program. Now we are learning in this brief statement from the military that, the U.S. government has had, in fact, a secret research program, which they now assure us had to remain secret because there was concern that this announcement might panic the American people. And that does make sense, I suppose. But the problem is, with it being handled with military security, there's no question and answer session. And it occurs to me that if it is logically correct and true that the military has made this disclosure based on gun camera video from the F-18A Growler jets, then why don't they take the next very simple logical step? Since the U.S. government has officially investigated the Roswell incident by so many accounts in 1947, then why don't they just declassify the documents related to what happened to the spacecraft that the government picked up and carried away and transported away? We don't know where. And why not tell us about the reports that bodies were obtained at this time? Supposedly there were 2 living bodies after the crash and 2 dead bodies. And whatever happened to those? And how about some disclosure of facts that relate to 60 years ago, if there is to be disclosure? Anyway, you can see why there is plenty of opportunity for further disclosure, by the government, and I welcome the disclosure if it's here, but as an academic, we never take one person's word for it, and would like to know more and like to know some of the details. And before we can touch such a thing academically, we have to know what the details are. And having such disclosure in a secretive environment of military security is very frustrating. So I am a little bit dubious, and I'm just waiting for something more substantial.
It's funny because, as you said, everybody's been waiting, for disclosure, and we've all talked about it ad nauseum. But when this article came out, I mean, it did cause a bit of a stir, and there was interest raised by it. But in a way, it sort of seemed kind of anticlimactic. It was just sort of plopped out there, and you're right. If they're going to disclose that, why not disclose the other? It doesn't make any sense after all these years, and I'm not sure I at all buy that it would throw the public into a panic. I think, that's gotten old, that excuse, and I think it would be much less of a panic than they think. I think what could be, and maybe you have an opinion on this, is that, if they reveal it now, then they're going to have to admit that they lied about certain things before. Or why in your mind would they release this one bit about this one project or this one program, and not release things like real hard evidence that they gleaned from Roswell, physical evidence?
So, very good point. Renee, I believe you are correct, and I don't have an answer to your question, obviously. That anything that I would say could only be speculation, but it is perhaps important for your readers or your listeners to know for a fact that there is so much more to be done before we can consider this to be genuine disclosure. And we are, as you see, put in a position to just wait and see. And we're very much aware that somebody else is in charge here. And that's a little bit unsatisfactory in the academic community, where we're accustomed to having discoveries announced and scientists getting very excited about it, but knowing, there is a discovery that we can confirm now, and we can then extend the reach and the importance and the breadth of our inquiries as necessary as we get more details. We're not in that position whatsoever. We're just left to discuss this as perhaps related to disclosure, and the door is closed.
Exactly. It seems lacking somehow. I'm just not sure what that's all about. But now, are you continuing your work with people who've had UFO experiences?
My own relationship with John Mack was at his invitation. I knew John Mack socially. We were both colleagues at a great university. And one day I received an unexpected phone call at my office, and it was John Mack who introduced himself, and I knew who he was, of course, and remembered our friendship and association. And he said that he had encountered something that was so unusual and so perplexing to him that he would like to discuss it with me because of all of the astronomical implications by it. And both of us were aware that something this hot is a little bit tricky to deal with, and that we would meet at a neutral space at the observatory that would be the cafeteria, so that whatever the status of my phone was and whatever else was unsure, we could avoid by meeting in this public and open space. At that time, John Mack told me about the nature of the abduction experiences that he's been hearing from many trustworthy individuals who pass all kinds of psychological examinations. They are not raving loonies. They are perfectly intelligent people, speak coherently. And there was the offer that I might meet with some of them and discuss all the phenomena involved. And I readily accepted, and a long association with John Mack then followed, and it didn't end. Well, it ended only with his death, and I feel as though I learned a great deal from this. But the problem was always that I could not discuss it in the academic corridors of Harvard University, and John Mack himself was, in the end, at the early stages of persecution.
Yes.
For his daring to say such an outrageous thing as apparently intelligences from remote planets were visiting the Earth in spaceships. That was what all the UFO fuss was about. And there are people, human beings, who have knowledge of conditions of life around other stars. And I was just excited and titillated beyond description. I remember when he sent me a copy of his book, Abductions. I sat up for the whole weekend and did basically nothing but burrow myself in his book, and have been endlessly fascinated since then. Of course, something so big raises to me, as a working scientist, endless questions of what is the nature of life in the universe, what life are we in contact with, and what does the new abduction material tell us? And the first thing I noticed was how much an abduction account read to me like the Christmas story. I started to notice back in 1992 that, what was this remarkable star that the wise men saw in the east? And it was so impressive that they got on their camels, their sports cars, as quickly as they could, and made their way to Bethlehem bearing presents, gifts of frankincense and myrrh. You recall the story. And then what was, in addition to the questions of what about the light that was seen, well, what about the choirs of angels and archangels? Who were they, really? And then the story about the Annunciation, and the visit by an angel who told Mary not to be afraid, that this was all had the permission of the universe and all that. Everything just sounded like the Christmas story told to me. And so I was fascinated to put the whole new knowledge in the context of ancient biblical knowledge, and to have a more complete picture of what that might have been. So anyway, I had a long association with John Mack. Yes, thank you, Renee.
Oh, yeah, he was wonderful. Now, as you mentioned, it was becoming well known that he was getting a lot of flack at Harvard. I mean, my goodness, an academic studying, or researching an edgy subject like UFOs and alien abductions and alien experiences and encounters. My goodness, it was really something that we hadn't seen that much of in the halls of ivy, should I say. And so he did get a lot of flack for that. Now, did you, or were you aware if he got other flack from other outside agencies or anything else? And I guess what I'm asking, and forgive me if this is a rude question, but I remember very well when Dr. Mack was killed. He was in London, if I'm not mistaken, and he was run over on the streets of London and killed. I wondered at the time whether or not, there was anything to that, whether or not there was anything suspicious. And I never really heard much about that. Did you ever wonder, or did you ever hear anything or question the way that Dr. Mack passed?
Yes. Yes to both questions of yours. In the first place, I also heard the story, or heard very quickly about this tragic death. And at the same time, I could understand it perfectly well, because the same thing had almost happened to me only 2 months earlier. Let's recall that John Mack had just finished giving a lecture, which was the purpose of his trip to London, and he was exiting the lecture hall, and I just know that his mind was full of thoughts about, did I communicate my material adequately? Did it seem like the audience got it? Was I comprehensive? Was I clear in my discussion? Was I modest in my conclusions? How did it seem to be going over? All those questions would have been consuming him at this moment. And walking across a street, apparently, he got hit by the automobile. Now, it happened to me that only 2 months before, I was in Edinburgh, Scotland, which is, of course, a UK nation, and a similar thing happened. I was approaching an intersection and began walking across the street, and habitually looking to the left, which is the direction that I would look if I were in New York City to see if any traffic was approaching. And suddenly I heard the brakes squeal very close by to the right of me, and saw a bus. When I looked, I saw a bus come to a screeching halt, because I had almost done the same thing that John Mack had done, that is, stepped off the curb into the path of an automobile. And I could understand perfectly the situation in his mind, and why he absent-mindedly may have resorted to lifetime habits of not looking in the direction of traffic danger in the traffic.
Right. Now, I thought that.
To also add, if I might, Renee,
yes.
That I later learned that he did not die instantly, and that, in fact, he was alive for a few hours following the accident. This was told to me firsthand. And I think even that he was able to have a phone call with his wife, and did not in any way mention that this appeared to be a conspiracy, or that this appeared to be foul play. And there is reason to believe that in communications with him after the accident, and when he was again coherent, that he bore no malice for the accident, and simply accepted that he had brought about his untimely death, apparently, by stepping out into traffic. So I don't myself have any thoughts about this being any kind of a conspiracy.
Oh, that's good. I know exactly what you mean about UK traffic, and particularly London. There is that idea of, looking to the wrong direction for oncoming traffic, but also the streets are so narrow for the amount of traffic that they bear in London, and they come by really fast. So when you're standing on the curb, traffic is right there. You can reach out and touch the cars if you want. So I could see how it could very easily happen, and it's probably pretty easily, it's probably a fairly common occurrence in London, especially for people who are visitors. So thank you for clearing that up. That was just a little niggling thought that I'd had all these years since John Mack's death. But you know what? It's time for us to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to have more with Dr. Rudolph Schild. We're going to be talking about UFOs, and we're going to be talking about the very origins of life on our planet. Stay with us. Welcome back to Night Vision. I'm your host, Renee Barnett. If you're just joining us, with me tonight is Harvard astrophysicist Dr. Rudolph Schild. He is talking to us tonight about a variety of subjects. We started off with this disclosure of this Pentagon program of UFO research and study, and we got into Dr. Shield's work with Dr. John Mack, the late Dr. John Mack of Harvard, who was involved in studying what he called UFO experiencers. I think up to that time, the terms were abductees and contactees, and I believe it was Dr. John Mack who first used that term experiencer. I could be wrong. That's just my recollection. Lord knows my memory's not as good as it used to be, but that's what I remember, and I'm sticking to it. Anyhow, and over break, Dr. Schild, I was asking you about your continuing work in that area, and you were talking about an annual meeting that you have. Could you share a little bit about that and why you do get together with a group of UFO abductees or experiencers every year? What are you gleaning from that?
So, in fact, the group extends back to the times when Dr. Mack had active research underway with a group of experiencers, and they would arrange a special gathering at Newport, Rhode Island every summer. And it was an occasion for a few academics to meet with the abductees to answer any questions that would be involved in researching this topic. The academics saw this as a beautiful way to very quickly expand their understanding of the nature of the universe. And there's one topic that often entertained us, which was what I sometimes refer to as the mission creep involved in studying the UFO phenomena. That mission creep has to do with the fact that it has been so often observed that the experiencers who've had close encounters of perhaps the first or second kind, maybe the third or fourth kind, that these experiencers find that there is a lasting imprint on their minds in some way that causes them to be interested in other phenomena of psychological character, phenomena that I call the modern miracles. The miracles that are seen are totally ununderstood and unexplained in the psychiatric community. And I'm talking about things like remote viewing, like near-death experiences, things like telepathy, things like precognition. So many of these, astrology for that matter. So many of these things are of interest to these people that I myself have investigated them a little bit, but it's not really what I do. Instead, my focus is to visit with this crowd and take the following point of view. Suppose I, as a research scientist, adopt the posture that everything they say is true. Then I'm in a position to wrap a string in my mind around this expanded body of knowledge and ask myself, then what have we learned about the universe? What has to be true about the universe for all of these experiences to be true? Now, in doing so, I leave room in my mind and say, I'm actually holding this as 95% probably true, but 5% of doubt. So that leaves me in a space to be hopefully objective enough to be patient, to listen, keep my eyes and ears open and my mouth shut.
And, what conclusion, if any, or maybe theory, do you have that links this idea up of near-death experiences and the alien experience and the remote viewing and the ESP and that sort of thing? What is the commonality among all that?
Excellent question, and I'm glad you asked. I'm very delighted to be able to talk about this for just a few minutes. I immediately found myself drawn to the work of Dr. Edgar Mitchell, with whom I've had now a lasting friendship for about 15 years, because we were introduced when we shared the speaker's podium at conferences. So there was one notable conference with John Mack, Edgar Mitchell, and myself, and we talked about the meaning of these experiences and what a scientist approaching the various phenomena thinks about them. So I looked to Edgar Mitchell's formulation or understanding of how the quantum universe has already provided the necessary space or the necessary principles for us to understand how these phenomena could all originate in what Edgar was calling the quantum hologram. But if you want to, you can just call it a mystery or spiritual dimension of space.
And you're talking about Edgar Mitchell, I assume.
I'm talking about Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14, the sixth man to walk on the moon. His mission was accomplished in, I believe, 1972. And he describes the mission and where that left him in his book, The Way of the Explorer by Edgar Mitchell.
Wow. Yeah, he was amazing. Another person that was brave to sort of come out into the public eye and face the ridiculers and the naysayers. A lot of people in the chat room have been talking about Dr. John Mack's bravery, and then in essence your bravery as well. It takes a lot of courage when you have an academic career to stand up and draw attention to some of these subjects, because not many want to do it. It is putting your career on the line in a lot of ways, I would think.
Yes. So this will, I hope, will amuse you. What I've done in the face of all of this problem is to adopt a split personality side to my being, in which Dr. Rudolph E. Schild signs scientific reports in the Astrophysical Journal and in the other referee literature. And then there's this guy, Rudy Schild, who's looking into psychological phenomena that are somehow underlying the UFO experience. So it's with this dual personality that I'm able to survive. And so it is that I never raise my hand in the seminar room at Harvard University, and I also worked all this time for the Smithsonian Institution, but I would never raise my hand and say what the little people told me.
No. Well, I have to ask you, have they told you anything?
Yes, very amazingly so. So let me tell you a couple of interesting things that have happened along the way.
Oh, please. Oh, my goodness.
Only about 3 years ago, in astronomical observations, it was noticed that there was a cloud of gas that was approaching the black hole at the center of our galaxy. And it was initially very puzzling. Nobody could understand how a gas cloud could find itself in this position. It was seen to be approaching the galactic center black hole, and astronomers got busy with their computers and did what's called simulations. They put in all of the equations of physics that seemed relevant into the computer and tried to find a global solution to demonstrate what would happen in the close encounter that was to follow the next year. Well, the predictions based on the computer modeling all showed that the cloud would be hopelessly disrupted because of intense torques that would be experienced in the close proximity to the black hole object. And so all of these simulations predicted the destruction of the cloud and the clouds eventually falling back onto the black hole. Now, some of my enlightened beings meditated on this question of what would happen to cloud G2 and told me that the conclusion they had reached was that nothing would happen at all. It would just pass harmlessly by and be relatively unaffected. Well, the event was originally expected to happen, I believe, in the autumn of 2015. And as the autumn wore into winter, I started asking around in the halls and corridors of the university, well, what was going on? And the answer was, well, there's a new prediction that this won't happen until next spring. Aha, that's very suspicious. Then next spring came and went in total silence. All telescopes on Earth were pointed in this direction and making their measurements of the brightness and the spectrum and the polarization of the light and all the kinds of things that we measure in astrophysics with our big mountaintop telescopes, our spacecraft, our radio telescopes. All of that was engaged. And dead silence. The fact was, nothing had happened. The cloud had just passed harmlessly by the galactic hole near the galactic center, the black hole near the galactic center, and nothing happened to it, and it's still cruising out there, now away from the scene of the action. So it was possible for people having their gifts to tune into the universe to the extent that they could make a correct astronomical prediction that beat the best guesses of the professional community.
Okay, you called them enlightened beings. Now, who are the enlightened beings you're speaking of? Are these human beings?
These are human beings, and one of the modern miracles or these side effect interests they have is that many of them do channeling. They are able to pick up on the wisdom of entities in the universe, and you may call them angels if you want, but they are the enlightened beings that made the safe prediction.
And how did you come into contact with them? I'm assuming you don't want to say who they are, but what kind of people are they? How did you happen to be in touch with them that you would know to ask them these questions?
Well, the fact is that they came to me because they heard that I was a scientist who was interested in these kinds of things and wanted to demonstrate to me that, in fact, these experiences they were having have teeth. They have very deliberate meaning, and that they can relate to events in the physical universe that we can study astronomically. And so one of the individuals that was communicating to me had massive brain surgery with a orange size of object, like a 4-inch diameter spherical object removed from his brain cavity. And this was a massive brain surgery, and something about him has changed. He is in a very, very slow process of recovery. And however, he does communicate with some kind of off-planet entities. A second person who is also involved in this project with me has had 7 near-death experiences. The human individual here has a difficulty in regulating in the autonomic nervous system the temperature of her body, so that if her normal equilibrium is disturbed, she goes into a thermal runaway state. At the local hospital, she's pronounced dead, and 2 days later, she finds herself in a stainless steel box waiting for the next step. So she starts pounding on the sides of the box, and astonished people attending the mortuary let her out of her stainless steel cage.
Wow.
So she is in contact with some entities in the universe and is able to successfully bring information to me about the nature of the universe. And I put together the stories that she tells with the information that science is coming up with on its own using mathematical principles. And that is primarily the work of Edgar Mitchell, going back to Edgar now, with the quantum hologram that extends what we call the quantum theory to include consciousness. And that's a very deep swallow. If you like, I'll elaborate on that a little bit, Renee.
Yes, please.
Since the 1920s era, physics has had the shock of having to learn that there's more to our existence than just our physical flesh and bones, that we seem to have some kind of soul connection, but also that the same theory, called the quantum theory, that describes fundamental particles like the atom and the proton and the neutron, can also accommodate a different waveform which describes our consciousness and which resonates with our brain. This is at the seat of all of these mysterious psychological phenomena that I call the modern miracles, and we've been spelling out as precognition, remote viewing, and so on. Now, seen in this way, I can suddenly understand how there could be some teeth in the pursuit of astrology. Remember that I'm saying now that the brain, working with the quantum field, which has long been understood to describe the reality of the physical particles of the universe, that now an expanded understanding shows that we can also understand the nature of consciousness as a differently structured wave in the same quantum space that describes physical reality. Is that too complicated? Should I say that again?
Say it one more time, please.
Where we have already come to accept as a civilization that a quantum theory describes what you might call the existence or the physical existence of all matter in the universe, and the quantum waves that describe the existence of matter are approximately spherical waves that surround the electron or the proton or the elementary particle itself. And then you can extrapolate that or extend that by noting that, in fact, our body is a large collection of electrons, protons, and neutrons, and they're
Yep.
arranged in the chemical elements, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, and so on. And it turns out then that this same field, which with spherical shaped waves, spheres, surround the particle, there can also be floating around in this space a spiral acting type of wave or cyclical waves, or in the quantum theory, you'll hear these described as Healy waves that describe consciousness. And in doing so, describe the entire emotional content of the universe.
Well, it's amazing that, consciousness is getting studied in this way. It's something, like you said, I guess Dr. Mitchell's theory was expanded to include consciousness. And I see how that's sort of like the missing piece, isn't it?
Very much so. So let me go into that a bit. This was first understood by renegade scientist Wilhelm Reich, who was born in Europe but emigrated to America in the turbulent times between World War I and II, and did his principal laboratory work in America, actually, and was studying the properties of waves that he felt he could see in darkness, and he noticed that they had this spiraling attribute, and he called them orgone energy. But we in the world of quantum physics talk about this as waveforms related to consciousness. And it was understood that these waveforms could actually be seen in brainwave studies, which were emerging just at around the turn of the millennium, around the year 2000. So the first discovery came from Parma, Italy, where a scholar named Rizzoliti was discovering what is called the mirror neuron system acting in the brain. And then his work was taken up in America by a research group led by Dr. Gazzola, Gazzola, and her research papers are published in the psychiatric and psychological appropriate journals. And she confirmed that the brains of two monkeys having the same experience developed the same brainwave pattern. This could now be established with things like functional magnetic resonance imaging that can directly image brainwaves in the brain. So we now have a actual science, the science of brain studies, which now is starting to tie together what's going on in the brain and these additional capabilities of the universe to support another kind of wave, which is what we call consciousness. Now, it's very significant that Dr. Wilhelm Reich was the only person known to be arrested for his scientific work, thrown into federal prison where he died, and have his entire library from his living room and from the laboratory on his estate burned in a public display in public.
Wow.
In other words, the only scientist I know of who was persecuted for his scientific investigations.
And what do you think they were afraid of?
They were afraid of its upsetting, I presume, of upsetting the economics and the entire social fabric of our times, because if things like UFOs become known and we're learning about off-planet civilizations, this would be very disruptive. He also knew that our religious feelings and our approaches to the Creator, the cosmic intelligence we say in the university system, that would make unnecessary the theology of today. It would completely upset the what you would call the balance of power in our academic community.
Right. I was curious as to whether there was a religious element to it. Naturally, I assumed that there would be, because it would upset a lot of doctrines, I guess.
All true, Renee. This is pretty heavy stuff, but we might as well get used to it, because now we have the official word acknowledged by the U.S. government that these UFO objects do exist. There are intelligences on other planets, and they're coming here in their UFO spacecraft, and they have overwhelming capabilities way beyond anything that we have developed so far, to the best of my knowledge.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. Now we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about more on that, and also the origins of life on our planet. Is it all connected? I'm sure it must be. Stay with us. Welcome back to Night Vision. My goodness, my head is spinning. I just asked my guest tonight, Dr. Rudolph Schild, Harvard astrophysicist, if he could please write a book called Astrophysics for Dummies, just for me, not for my listeners. They're all very, very, very smart. But I'd love to get my head around more of all these theories. It's so interesting. Now, Dr. Schild, your work with the UFOs, with the experiencers, with things, with certain phenomena, or, what we call phenomena, like near-death experiences, remote viewing, extrasensory perception, and those things. I know you have a lot of work that you've done in the field of studying the very origins of our planet here, the very origins of life on our planet. And also, you've done a lot of work in studying black holes and something called MECOs, which are totally blowing my mind right now. They're magnetospheric, eternally collapsing objects. Is there a link between black holes, between MECOs, between all these other types of phenomena, and how we were made here on this planet, how life originated on this planet?
Well, absolutely, yes. And they actually have, most importantly, a tie-in with our process of memory and how information is stored in the universe. But Renee, I believe you really wanted me to talk, to begin with, more about the existence of life in the universe and how it would progress toward Earth, or has it been here and is in fact that already buried in our DNA, and all of these questions about the origin of life on Earth, and does it come from outer space in the form that's sometimes called panspermia. So would it be appropriate for me to take off in that direction before coming back to the more problematic black holes?
Absolutely. And panspermia is the theory by which life is brought here in asteroids and meteorites. And am I mistaken that it's in the form of bacteria? Because I think there's another theory that where it's a biological origins of life. Is that the same as panspermia?
Yes, I believe
abiogenesis. That's what
I believe it's much safer to talk about the direct communication of living entities to our planet, to, as you said, asteroids and meteors and so on.
Yeah.
So there are two important things to be said about this, and that is that there is a class of meteorites which has been recognized. They're called, I can't recall what the class is called, I'm sorry. But this class of meteorites, when sectioned carefully, often reveals remnants of life. And typically, opening one of these meteors will produce evidence for approximately 12 different life forms, 6 of which we recognize from studies here on Earth, and 6 of which are completely unfamiliar to us. In other words, things that we don't know here on Earth at all. So that would suggest that, in fact, some of the things that we do recognize came to us from space. It's important to understand what the astronomical case is here, because there would have been a time in the universe when conditions for panspermia, or the transmission of life material, would have been much more strongly favored. I'm talking about a time long ago when we believe that the universe was much smaller, but containing about the same amount of mass, and also the universe was much warmer. So where it's now extremely cold, on our Fahrenheit thermometers, it would be about 450 degrees below zero. But that's today's temperature that we measure.
Right.
But long ago, it would have been 600 degrees, and at other times 6,000, and at other times 6 million. So let's focus for a moment on when the temperature was about 600 degrees, because we do have living materials observed near hot sulfurous vents in our oceans sometimes that survive water temperatures that are up in this range. And we know that there would be plenty of water in the universe at this time, near the time of origin, at the beginning, called the Big Bang. So we have every reason to believe that a smaller, more tightly packed universe would shuffle the pieces around much more easily than they can be shuffled today, because the distances have increased by a factor of 100. Also, conditions of temperature and density and presence of water would have been more ideal.
Yes.
Now, it has in addition been communicated to me that the movie Thrive by Foster Gamble, is correct in observing that the purpose of life, the purpose of the universe, is for life to emerge and thrive in the universe to the glory of its creator. And that makes a great deal of sense to me. And I believe that understanding the purpose of the universe then helps me understand my own purpose in the universe. And that purpose will be to, again, assist the thriving of life. But often in my life, I'm confronted with decisions about career changes and major events, buying property or whatever. And the guiding principle that I adopt from these kinds of studies is that I should always make the decision that keeps me aligned with the purpose and intent of the universe for life to thrive, because my own efforts will be more successful if I stay with that mission and purpose. Okay. That's a stunned silence. Really.
Yes, it is. And I'm considering that. And as you were talking about this idea, and they're also discussing it in the chat room, the idea of panspermia and life being transmitted to Earth from other places in the universe via asteroids and meteorites. I mean, that sort of sounds kind of random. Do you believe that there was some kind of purpose or intent that can be shown or evidenced by life coming to this planet? Or was it just a random situation?
It's almost certainly true in my view. And this is getting a little bit philosophical, and I'm now speaking as Rudy Schild, a schizophrenic guy who departs from some precepts of science now and again to be open to other kinds of knowledge, other ways of knowing. So let me first get back in answering your question to the issue of the panspermia and what do we actually see, because if you read any textbook on the subject of astronomy and life in space, you will read the statement that space is a very inhospitable place for life to exist, that there are large fluxes of X-rays and gamma rays and ultraviolet light and other things which are directly harmful to life. And yet, we have only just recently learned in the last year that there are organisms growing on the side of the International Space Station in orbit around the Earth. This was reported first by Russian astronauts who were tasked with taking some clean cloths and wiping down the exterior surface of the spacecraft, and his noticing that, wait a minute, there's this green stuff all over the place. And it's obviously growing. It wasn't there a month ago. So we have to get over the concept that space is totally inhospitable to panspermia or life cannot exist in space. There it is in your face. Now, the other means that we've discussed, which is life traveling in meteorites, I have already mentioned that meteorites cut open in sterile environments show the presence of these formerly living creatures, some of which we can identify as similar to ones known on Earth. And so I think it's easier to imagine that life does fall onto the Earth than to insist out of religious belief or something that it doesn't.
Yes, I would think so. I mean, it makes more sense than the stories we've been brought up with, certainly. But now, in this theory, all life on Earth came from elsewhere. Is that correct?
That's not clear. We believe that we see evolution going on in the animal species around us, and that in many ways the atmosphere and the history of the Earth shaped the evolutionary development of things which started out with these patterns in nature, the existence of DNA and the structuring of consciousness waves. All of those things contributed to this in ways which we can't really piece together yet.
Well, now I don't know if we have time to take any questions from the chat room, but there was one, it kind of harks more back to the original subject that we talked about at the top of the show about this release of information. It's kind of a long question. If I could read it to you, Dr. Schild, Neutron is asking, would you both agree with my suspicion that this small initiation of disclosure by the Pentagon signifies a possible change of polarization in the relationship of the establishment and the government, and I guess he's talking about possible indications that the establishment may become a breakaway society. Any ideas about any of that? I mean, of course, certainly I wouldn't know. He's asking both of us.
I think that's a very, very good question, but I don't think you need a scientist to address those points. I would prefer to stay more with topics that relate to science, because I don't want to bring my sponsoring university. And by the way, I am a retired faculty member of the University of Harvard University. I did teach courses there, but I was also a staff member for the Smithsonian Institution as a scientist scholar. So I don't want opinions that are of political character to become part of this discussion. It's just too complicated. And I think they're probably better addressed by a better informed people than me.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to get Rudy on here for a couple minutes. I don't think we're going to get him back. We've got Dr. Schild now. Anyhow, Dr. Schild, what's coming up for you in your research? And I'm assuming you're going to continue to meet with these UFO experiencers. And, I wanted to ask you, along with the ideas that you said you've come to realize, and it's become documented, that so many people who have UFO experiences also have had or develop a keen interest in other types of phenomena, NDEs, remote viewing, ESP, that sort of thing. Were there any other I won't say conclusions, but were there any other commonalities? Are there other data that you're sort of collecting and looking at in terms of trends of, what these people are experiencing and talking about? What other types of information are you able to get for your purposes?
Yes, very interesting question, and thank you, Renee. I want to first talk about the situation with regard to astrology. Recall that astrology has been with us about as long as our civilization has been here. People have noticed that there are things moving up there in the sky, the sun moving in the calendar year, the moon moving through and circling the earth once in a month, and the various planets getting in various alignments throughout the seasons. And it has been confused whether that's the subject of astrology or astronomy sometimes. But astronomers have, I believe, gone a little bit overboard in trying to make the case that this has nothing to do with scientific research. It's my impression that the new quantum hologram theory, the Edgar Mitchell theory, which says that our brain waves have everything to do with consciousness, and that these are quantum in character, that means that the coherences that are in the universe, and by coherences I mean the mathematical description of consciousness, that those coherences and our ability to resonate with the universe, where I see consciousness as a resonance of the human brain with other structures and entities in the universe, how that might be assisted by alignments of the planets. So I could imagine that when the planets are all strung out in a row, for example, that some kinds of wave patterns that affect our brain will enter our solar system more easily than perhaps at other times when the various planets are scattered all over the sky, or perhaps are on opposite sides of the sky, or what have you. In other words, I can see that the combination of the quantum understanding of consciousness and the quantum structuring of mass, not a new idea, going back to the 1920s, how that is adjusted and affects our consciousness. And by affecting our consciousness, I mean we will experience good days and bad days. There might be days when we just feel glum. And that could be because happiness waves have a hard time reaching planet Earth due to the alignments of the planets. And equally, I can imagine the opposite, that there are some days we're effervescent and very, very happy because happiness waves, which resonate with the happiness in the universe, are assisted in entering the universe and are actually even perhaps amplified by planetary alignments. So can you see that there is some justification for the much forbidden theory or idea of astrology coming around in these new ideas about a quantum universe?
It really is. Now, these are these ideas that mainstream science are embracing as well now?
Absolutely not. I'm speaking here as Rudy Schild.
Okay, Rudy's back. Good. We have to clarify that. I was getting excited for a minute that, science was coming along. But, in a lot of ways, science has, in the last few years, at least started acknowledging things like, the possibility of parallel universes and that sort of thing. And then study in areas such as you study, like black holes.
Yes.
Now, could I ask you one more thing? And I'm going to have to apologize to the chat room if there were more questions. I've sort of hogged up all your time today, and I really apologize. But I was wondering, when we're thinking about this idea of panspermia and things coming in, basically on rocks and smashing against the earth and cracking open and, causing life to start growing. We hear all these stories, and there is this research into the idea of ancient astronauts and how, we're really products of these gods from the sky, the Anunnaki who come. Is there any do you see that as being completely contrary to the idea of panspermia, or is it apples and oranges, or is there some compatibility in, or even is there a connection with those two things?
Excellent question, Renee. Thank you very much. So in the first place, I would like to mention the fact that the knowledge of these contacts with extraterrestrial beings is rather culture-wide on our planet. So the Native American community has its sense of there being spirits from other worlds. Of course, our own Christian tradition has a Christmas story, and there are some old paintings which show flying saucers and things in the sky. And we can give other examples from other religious traditions of other people on Earth about contact with people often admired as gods having been in our midst. And I think it's hard to deny in the ancient aliens sense that there have been visitations for a long time. And by the way, before we get too entirely focused on the military threat posed by these UFO vehicles, which are obviously superior in capabilities to our own military vehicles, and decide that they are our enemy, I would point out that these spirits of all kinds have been visiting us throughout the history of our civilization, as near as I can tell. And if they did want to take over, I believe they would have by now. So I don't fear any visitations of other beings from other places.
Yeah, they could have done it. They could have done anything by now.
So what's the problem?
Exactly.
Now I want to get off to something that is astronomically known, and your audience will surely be hearing these days that, astronomers discovered a new family of planets orbiting this star and that star, and basically all of the nearest stars to us. And so we've come to understand that 20 years ago, we could not appreciate how many planets there were orbiting stars in our galaxy and the universe.